Hey, and welcome to part 3. We're going to be going to the conversation right away with Leon Fontaine, Jeff Thiessen, David Leese of the Frontier Center for Public Policy. You know, these guys have got such brilliant minds, a lot of wisdom to bring as to what's going on in our nation. Hey, if you're concerned about what's going on or you want to be educated as to what's happening in Canada, stay tuned for this conversation. Tell your friends about it. You can hit us up on social media. Here we go. Here's the conversation.
You know, we fought all kinds of amazing battles, whether it was to try to deal with the Depression. Can you imagine that time?
Yeah.
Where we as a country worked together or didn't work together? When we looked at, you know, the battles of World War I and II, among others, how we came together as a nation. And it wasn't just about my rights, it was about serving each other.
Exactly.
And I dare say that's a bit of love, isn't it? So if we look at our history and all that together, gosh, shouldn't that give us some clues about what kind of country we need to become as we make our choices in the next election?
So good. And they weren't thinking about their rights and freedoms as much as their duty and responsibility
Yes,
when they went on the battlefield.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm concerned about our country, but I'm also hopeful. I know that all things will come together here in God's plan, but it doesn't mean that we are passive and that we don't act the best we can. I would encourage people to get involved in local politics.
Yes.
I'm a bit of a weirdo. I got involved in local politics when I was 19. And you know, it was a thoroughly enjoyable experience. It was challenging. It was a lot of hard work. But it was an experience that formed me and shaped me. And I think we need a lot more people getting involved in the forum of electoral politics and leadership. I always marvel at sometimes the quality of people on the electoral stage these days. And I don't mean to sound too critical, but I tell you, sometimes I wonder, did these people ever even have a real job? How did they get elected?
Yes.
Like you know?
Where's the track record?
Where's the track record?
Like, why would you vote someone in without a track record? Then that should be almost last chance.
A lot of these people have never managed anything in their life. So how would you look to them for the big, you know, decisions of our times and what needs to be done? So I think you need to look to yourself in the mirror and say, wow, how could I maybe run for the school board or run for municipal council? 100%. You know, it's easy to just critique or criticize. It's another thing to step into the forum. I think I'm paraphrasing Theodore Roosevelt's quote from years ago, but truly there's lots of ways to get involved.
The greatest way to manipulate people, I think, is to give some of the truth.
Yeah.
And one of the things we were chatting about in the green room earlier was this issue of truth. You know, when you go to one of our courts, it's the truth, the whole truth, and then nothing but the truth, because there is no other way to judge righteously, fairly, than to have that. And so when Jeff asks you, like, where do we go? I'm going to even be a little more specific. Like, where would you go when most people I talk to don't trust the news? They don't know any more about social media unless you can track this person's ability down. So when they say, this is what's happening in Canada, and then they say, well, this is what's going on over here, people are just saying to me, would you tell me where to go for truth? Where do I find the whole truth? How would you answer that?
Well, there's such also, to add to that to the question, disinformation is just as popular as information. It's hard to decipher. You look at political parties now manipulating videos to get across a different meaning than what's out there. There's people out there who just love polluting online with false stories.
Right.
It's hard to decipher through. It really is.
And it is very confusing, you're right, David, because we are also in another transition zone that people may not understand. We've moved from what I would refer to as more of a traditional and enlightenment view of truth, where we look at the, quote, facts. We look at the so-called evidence of issues, and we try to discern what is the right way to go. But there's an emergence of what is called postmodernism, where persons don't necessarily believe in those facts anymore, but rather it's your story, Jeff, that matters. And my feelings set the tone, and I start making up my own facts about what I think is important. The facts don't matter. And I think that's very dangerous territory.
Very
And that's because that's when you can vilify people and write them off and say they're just simply do not matter. And what matters is my vision of what needs to happen, my vision of utopia. And that's how, through history, and that's actually nothing new. This has happened before, where many millions of people die. This is the vision that came from Stalinist Russia, or the Soviet Union, or in China. I remember going in China to a number of memorials where millions of people were killed in the name of the Communist Revolution. And estimates now that some 120 million people died in the Chinese Revolution. Who knew? Who knew? So in this case, we have to be, again, very discerning. And if we don't bring a sense of kindness and honorable give and take with each other, then we know something's wrong.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, this is a move away from being objective in how we view things into subjectivity, right?
Yeah.
What you're just talking about. And really, subjectivity comes down to the intention of the person communicating
Right.
what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So we're leaving that the chance
Yeah.
of saying, we trust you have good intentions, so your story
Right.
value. Like, we're not trying to dismantle someone's story,
That's
but
right.
if we get away from objectivity and how we can measure and trust things, then that forms chaos. And
Exactly.
we know that leads
Yeah,
to
like
death.
surely if someone weighs in and says, well, no, we can't have that discussion. Rather, that's in complete contrast to the vision saying, no, we're all Canadians. We're all trying to go shoulder to shoulder to figure out what's the best thing that we can do to create a better country. That's something different.
One of the things that I was just thinking about as you were talking is that often when I'm listening to somebody talk, I had to train myself to not believe them. Because I was raised in a home, you know, that had Judeo-Christian values, that was you should love and respect people. And with that came just believe people. Interesting. And so now when I hear someone talk, when I believe them, and then people around me kind of go, why would you believe that? Well, because they said it. And there's almost a naivety to that, that I had to almost retrain myself to say, what makes what they said true? And then I must dive in and check out the track record, check out it for myself. How can I, you know, it says, a proverb says, the first person always sounds right until you hear the second. And the other thing I did, and I'd love you to comment on this, is that when I found out the only difference between leading people and manipulating people is motive, because it's the same skill set.
Right.
That shocked me.
Right.
That you can use great leadership principles and manipulate people, and it comes down to the motive of your own heart. So
Yeah. No, it's so true. And I think of often, it's been almost a rhetorical statement in leadership circles to talk about servant leadership. Mm-hmm. And I think Jesus modeled that the best. We know that. And what I found so instructive about servant leadership is the whole notion that a good leader is all about enabling a strong, pretty clear vision. And then it's all about serving the team to break through towards that vision. Every day, you've got a problem here. Hey, I think I can help you with this so we can go forward. And in really empowering them to strive towards that vision.
Totally. The term public servant isn't so common anymore, and that used to be the term pointing people going into office.
Or even the moniker, people have the honorable so-and-so, right? Because it denoted a point of goodwill and respect for their duty to serve the people, right? So I would say, when it comes to the Senate, as an example in the country, what if we propose that everybody just had an honorarium? We didn't even pay them a big wage. They're an honorarium. They got together 6 times a year and they debated some important issues. Anyway, I know this is more complicated constitutionally.
No, keep going.
But you've got to be able to create that ethos. And any leader creates a culture. Culture doesn't just happen, it's intentional.
Yeah.
And we've got to ask the question strategically, what kind of culture do we want in our country? Is it going to be a culture where it's all about me and my check? Or is it about serving others and enabling us to be a better country? And I know that sounds terribly rhetorical, but it's true.
No, it's powerful.
So you have to be aware of the culture that you're going to create. And that's an intentional one. And that's what I don't hear from these political leaders. I don't hear an intentional vision about not only the kind of bridges we're going to build, but the kind of way we're going to treat each other. Not with hate, but with care.
That's such a good point on culture, though. Like Leon and Sally in the church for Springs, they've preached on culture every single service. We talk about culture. Yeah. Like in our little preamble, when I host an IMC, it's because you said it perfectly. Culture needs to be intentional. If it's not intentional, it's going to develop to something you're like, what the heck is
Exactly.
this? And we talk about a culture of love, acceptance, and forgiveness every single time. We do it week in, week out. So people who've been sitting there for 20 years are like, I've heard this before. Yeah. But we need to remind ourselves daily of this thing.
Right. It's true. You know, like one of the things been coming to me as I'm listening to you talk is people need to go back to this biblical, phenomenal thought that love isn't a feeling. Love is valuing that person so that you can value someone while you disagree with most of what they believe. Right. Because value doesn't come from what you believe. I value you as a person. And I think that then it does a couple of things. It helps me to disagree with you and yet value you. And then we can be friends. We can go for coffee. We can go out and play a round of golf. We can live side by side. And you can have different religious beliefs. You can have different sexual beliefs. You can have different, all this area. But your value has to come because you are made in the likeness and the image of God.
Yeah. No.
And then I think if we can all do that, then I enjoy talking to you about it.
Exactly.
Because we both know that if we disagree on everything, when we're done, I'm still going to make you a burger. Right. And we're still going to go play a game of tennis. And I think this needs to be brought back in.
That's a great point.
By our families, our churches, by our government, rather than to vilify someone and to make them look stupid. So, you know, one of the things people do today is if you disagree with me, I'm going to call you racist. I'm going to call you this so I can end this conversation and have power. And once we see that's a trick that people do to have power, I want to go back to being able to have a cup of coffee, buy a meal for a friend, and let's sit down and disagree together because that's what gets the best conversations going.
That's right. No, I think you're spot on, Leon. One of the oldest books, or one of the oldest tricks in the book, pardon me, is if you're in an argument, there's all kinds of tricks you can play, right? Use a red herring, all kinds of things. Beg the question. But one of them that's used so often now is you just attack the person. Yep. And that's pathetic.
It is.
We should not, speaking of tolerance, tolerate attacking people.
That is no sign of
intelligence. It should be called out and said, no, you're attacking this person, you need to leave the room. That's not how we do things in our country. And that's why this part of this thing is really confusing and it's hard, is that there's a tradition. When you spoke a little bit about your background, Leon, you're kind of taught to be respectful of people, and that's very important. But there's a whole nother part that have been taught in other settings, dare I say in many universities, to hate people. Not just to be skeptical, but to hate them and to vilify them. That's something different. That's unacceptable.
Totally.
That is wrong, and we've got to start naming that and dealing with that because that is hurting our society. That's where my friend was coming from.
Do you think, as you've said that, it just made me think about this one thing. We all tend to think that whatever social media is saying in large numbers is the opinion of Canadians. I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true either.
I think we got to be careful though. The social media, it exploded. But what's exploded to you? 1,000 people? 10,000 people? There's 33 million out there. But people start thinking that way.
Yeah, I think well, ever since the emergence of smartphones and you look at how many, and also the education system, I think parents are no longer raising their children as much as they thought. And this social media phenomenon, which has literally inundated our world, is that it is just this momentum of, I'll use the word, I've used it a couple times, of chaos that goes forward that you think represents more people than it actually does. And it's a world of crazy ideas, to be honest.
But it is educating our kids.
It is educating.
It is pushing them in a direction.
For sure. Yes,
so
I will say
that's
that.
Unfortunate because it doesn't affect us.
No.
But it sure will affect a young mind.
Well, someone misrepresented a picture that happened in our one of our schools. And it went out, and it went viral, went across the country, and none of it was true. But the people that jumped on board, and it went viral across the nation, and then I'd talk to people and they'd say, well, you better be very careful. And they were actually talking about speaking truth. And I said, when are we going to stand up and speak truth even if there is a result that we don't like? So I just looked at that person and I said, I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm going to stand up for truth, the whole truth, because that little piece of truth was totally misconstrued. And then everybody jumped on board social media because they thought it was true, and they just attack. And then they found out, most of them, including MLAs, oh, okay, I'm offside on this one.
Wow.
Yeah, there's even, I think that's a perfect example of the vilification of something or someone. People were just jumping on board just to hate on someone.
Yeah.
They didn't know the facts.
They had an agenda. They didn't care.
You notice there was groups coming from across the country that have got no idea in this situation about a local school. They've got no idea what's going on, but they were coming in droves through Reddit and other
And
things.
so how do you think that happened?
I think through Reddit and chat groups and hey, here's something.
Right.
And I think because it is backed by a Christian
Okay,
organization.
but I don't know, this is part of the world I'm familiar with. None of this is by accident. This is not organic.
No.
This is all organized.
That was,
Yes.
You're right.
So I've often said to people, it's almost like the traditionalists, and I some of these words are so simplistic, but the traditionalist conservatives, I don't mean that in a party way,
No.
are not organized.
Yes.
Generally, and the other side is
Oh, yeah.
top to bottom.
You're-
There's thousands of groups right across this country in
Boom.
Canada that even train up people around this social activism. In fact, it's even taught in universities how to do this. So you have to look at the origins of some of the stuff and how it does not happen by accident and say, how do you respond accordingly and wake up people, again, all this wonderful civic capital, that people are just doing their work, going to school, loving each other, making their meals, and just trying to be good citizens. And they want to be left alone so they can save up money for their down payment on a house and raise a family. They're doing their thing. And meanwhile, these other people are organizing hard to bring about something else. So you can't be naive to that reality. And that's alive and well in this country, and people need to be aware of it.
Until someone shouts from the wall, that watchman on the wall, and
Right.
shouts, there's an enemy.
Correct.
Until we have someone doing that, people don't rush to whichever weapons are needed for that enemy. Right. And I think this conversation and many others, that they need to wake up that there's an enemy, and it's something that we haven't dealt with like this before. It's so cultural. It's so, coming in, and it's been at it for years. And it's time to wake up.
Yeah.
People.
And you have people. I'm really concerned about people's mental health these days because there's so many groups that, in order to advance their policy objective, it's all about creating fear.
Yep.
It's all about creating anger.
Yep.
And again, you gave the marriage counseling example earlier, Leon. That's manipulation.
Yeah.
And this has to be called out. Like when somebody starts trying to provoke all your emotions, what does that say? Come on, because let's talk about the depth and strength of your argument, 100%. Using discernment and using the brains that God has granted us, instead of just trying to manipulate you.
But some of the issues that are coming out really do get me emotional. Just I get really frustrated when things that are anti-Canada, that are really birthed in the in hell, really, right. Because they're just such terrible ideas that are just so destructive. I do get angry, and it's so frustrating to see people buying into ideologies that are so far out there.
Yeah, and that's where the argument or the thought needs to be able to stand the test of other people coming against it. Not like vilifying people, but if you have an idea, I don't care how crazy it is, you can have an idea, it's fine. But it should be able to stand the test of all of us going at the idea. That's how we build these ideas. So yeah, I can get crazy about that's so stupid, but I should be able to articulate that and
But if people get emotional about what you're saying, should you stop? Because Christians, as per se, well, we just don't want to disturb people. We don't want to upset people. Right. We just want to love people. We want people to feel good about themselves. You kind of go, whoa, 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 whoa. Follow Jesus. Mm-hmm. It goes a little bit differently when he's upset about something. So.
And it's not easy. And I would say that, going back to the question, Jeff, about action and doing things, I think this really goes to the heart of our relationship with God as well. How do we keep in mind that biblical wisdom as well as an attitude of both peace with God, a sense of action and serenity, but also courage? This is not the time for the faint of heart.
100%.
It's not going to be easy.
Did you get a chance to read Preston Manning's book, Do Something?
We did actually. A colleague of mine actually was the editor of that book.
Was he?
It's a very powerful book.
I'd encourage people to get it. I'd encourage people to really consider buying it on Amazon or talking to our organization and seeing if we can provide it for them. Because, you know, I think of like the subtitles there, 365 ways to improve our country, I think it is, or something like that. And I just, there's so many ways we can get involved. There's so many ways we can do something. And I just wish, I'm passionate about saying, okay, let's just not talk about it, but how do we do it? How do we get involved? How do we actually make a difference? And standing up for Canada, this is the time to do that.
You bet. I think that there's a lot to be said for living your lives in a good way as an example to others. Leadership by example is a phrase that comes to mind.
Yep.
I know it's funny. I saw an article the other week on this very topic, and one of them said, go to church. Get involved in your church. There's a reason why churches have historically played a very important civic role. That's part of the thing I've been studying over the course of the history of Western civilization, is the enormous contribution that the church has made. It's also made some terrible errors, but it's made an incredible impact that's transformed our societies. And I look at that, I also look at the fact that marriage is a good thing too. You know, that's a profound gift and opportunity to help build society. And those are worth supporting, because there's so many messages that you hear in our culture today that is actually, frankly, against marriage. It's almost pathetic, right? What do you mean you're throwing out marriage? You got to be kidding. How do you think we got to where we are? But more to the point, I think that we have to be emboldened and confident instead of just simply always fearful and afraid that some things are all going to go off the rails. And no, we have to also lead with a confident vision of where our society can go. And we have so much to offer our world. I look at the situation in Afghanistan, which is another election issue, by the way, that begs the question, how do we see ourselves being a force for good in the world? And that's not an easy question to answer, but we can't just insulate ourselves and cover and cower from that opportunity. But these are big issues, and it's a very significant time in the history of our country.
You mentioned something there about saying go to church. A quote came up in my head. I think a lot of Christians have probably taken and misconstrued it a little bit, but the idea of separation of church and state.
Oh, yes, right.
Was it John Adams, I believe? It might have been John Adams, or anyways. I think a lot of times religious people have viewed that the church should not be involved in the state affairs. But really that saying was, if you look at the history of it, it was actually to protect the church from the state, because a lot of these guys who came in and developed the United States, they all come from different places where the state and religion were so intertwined. If you didn't believe the religion of the state, you were persecuted. So they're trying to create freedom. And I wanted to bring that up because I've run into that myself, of people saying, well, how involved should Christians get? It's like, our faith shapes our worldview. It's how we view the world. You are to be involved. It doesn't. That saying does not give you a right to not be involved. So I thought that was important to bring up, because that often gets misconstrued. At least I've had conversations.
No, it's a brilliant point, David. And for years, it's morphed based on the kind of society and the history involved, where the church and the state kind of overlapped. A long history of that, and so yeah, the point was. There are church rights and freedoms, and they need to be protected, and the state shouldn't just override it. And what could be like that is so important today. If they're like, you think of COVID-19 and even, you know, the own situation of churches right across this country basically being shut down, so many of them. Now there were a few that rose to the occasion, as you know, from your own situation, which is really kind of an amazing story in itself. And so bravo on you, right? Because you could go to the liquor store, you could go get your groceries, but you couldn't go to a church service? Really? Come on, how is that not possible? So we've got to take a hard look at these things and say, come on, what kind of society are we going to live in?
And values too, where are our values going? I think that points directly to what we value too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when we start living our lives just from the perspective of pursuing pleasure and everything that I want, you know, it's when it's me, focused on me, that's the fastest place to depression you're ever going to find. And when you begin to look outside of yourself and go, what can I do for the people around me, for the world around me? Does it ever bring up a sense of joy and a sense of peace and a sense of accomplishment within you? One of the questions I was going to ask you, and now this is Frontier. Tell me a little bit about it. What can people do to learn? Because you have invested your life in something here. Why? Why do you see that so important? And go ahead and just put in a plug.
Okay.
I want to hear it.
Well, that's a very kind question. Well, the Frontier Center for Public Policy is really about better ideas for a better tomorrow. Again, it sounds so rhetorical, but really the idea of a think tank is to have special groups or teams of people try to think through different policy areas and say, how do we advocate for policy that best serves and empowers people? And I think if there's an example, so it's nonpartisan, but the idea is to think through based on good empirical evidence and analysis, what will serve society the best. So a good example of that is actually one of our patrons, an advisor, Sir Roger Douglas. And Peter Hawley, the Chief Administrative Officer, the President of Frontier, had an interesting relationship with Sir Roger Douglas. He was the finance minister when New Zealand, of all places, in the 1980s, was almost going to go under. It was the over expenditures. There was really a crisis of faith in the New Zealand government about what to do. And to the credit of Sir Roger and others, they worked to reconfigure the government to better serve the people, to empowerment. It was actually a Labour government that did this. It wasn't a Conservative government at the time. It was a Labour government that said, how do we improve the education system? They even changed the relationship with the Maori people to do the great buyout scheme to empower them to be much more entrepreneurial. And it's been very successful. I think, frankly, it's a model for our country. Because how do you, you can't just continue on forever just paying out. You've got to say, how do we enable people to be full functioning, proud societies?
We'll put on the screen how to get a hold of, because there is videos and papers and they can get involved in a way to help you. So we'll put that on the screen.
It's incredibly educational. I've used a lot of your guys' resources, even just some of the stuff we've been planning. I just want to say it's a credit to our country, all the stuff that you guys are doing. I think that a lot more people need to dive into that information that's available.
Well, thank you. And it's amazing, the kind of people that are involved with Frontier don't come from just one particular background. They come from right across the country with all the spirit of saying, you know what, there's got to be a better way to build this widget. And what would that be? And so we continue to learn an awful lot, and we so much appreciate people's feedback, but it's not easy because there's a lot of areas where people have staked out and said, oh, you can't talk about that. Well, really? That actually makes us even more curious and says, you know what,
Why not?
maybe we need to say, why not? Remember that? Somebody's always said, you can't do this. We would say, why not?
Well, there you have it. There's part 3 all done of the conversation. We still have one more part coming to you. Part 4 will be just around the corner as well. Hey, if this is important to you, tell your friends about it. You can go rewatch it on Corco Plus or VOD platform. Or also, if you want to find out what's happening at Miracle Channel, go to our website, Miracle Channel, or watch our social media. Anyways, we'll see you guys for part 4 of the conversation when you find it.